The farm was never meant for you anyway." My brother Connor's voice cut through the sterile hospital air like a blade as I lay connected to machines that beeped rhythmically, monitoring my recovery from the tractor accident that had shattered my pelvis and punctured my lung. Dad made it clear in his will. Meadowbrook Acres goes to the son who understands business, not the daughter who plays in the dirt. His smile was cold, calculated, as he adjusted his expensive suit jacket that looked absurdly out of place in the rural hospital of Willowbrook County. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." 3 months later, I received a phone call from Riverside National Bank that would change everything. "Miss Hartwell, we need to discuss the mortgage payments on your property. There seems to be some confusion about the current ownership status. But let me take you back to where this all began. Because the story of how I lost everything and then discovered the truth is one you need to hear from the beginning." The steady hum of medical equipment had become the soundtrack of my existence for 6 weeks following the accident that nearly claimed my life. September 15th, a date burned into my memory not just for the near-fatal collision between my tractor and a drunk driver's pickup truck, but for what it set in motion. While I drifted in and out of consciousness, fighting for survival in the trauma ward of Willowbrook General Hospital, my world was being systematically dismantled by the person I should have been able to trust most. My father, Samuel Hartwell, had passed away just 2 weeks before my accident. At 78, his heart simply gave out while he was checking on the autumn harvest. A peaceful end for a man who had dedicated his entire life to working the rich soil of Meadowbrook Acres. Our family farm in Willowbrook County had been in the Hartwell name for 4 generations, 1,500 acres of the most fertile farmland in the state, known for producing award-winning corn and soybeans that supplied contracts to 3 major agricultural companies. Dad's funeral happened without me, while I lay unconscious, unable to say goodbye to the man who had taught me everything about farming, about integrity, about the sacred responsibility of stewarding land that would feed families across the country. My brother Connor took charge of all arrangements. Connor, who had fled to the city 12 years earlier to pursue investment banking, who visited maybe twice a year and always complained about the primitive lifestyle and wasted potential of keeping land in agriculture, instead of developing it for commercial use. The soft knock on my hospital room door interrupted my painful memories. I expected Dr. Martinez with his daily updates on my healing progress, but instead saw Connor's imposing 6-foot frame filling the doorway. He wore a charcoal pinstripe suit I didn't recognize, his normally casual appearance replaced with the polished veneer of urban success. In his hand, he carried a leather briefcase that looked expensive enough to feed a family for months. "Rebecca," he said, not moving to embrace me, or even step closer to the bed. We had never been particularly close. The 8-year age gap and his obvious disdain for farm life had created a chasm between us that only widened as we grew older. But the coldness in his demeanor felt different now, more calculated and deliberate. "You look terrible," he observed, his eyes scanning the medical equipment surrounding my bed with the detached assessment of someone evaluating damaged property. "Nearly dying tends to have that effect," I replied, attempting a smile despite the pain medication that made everything feel foggy and distant. "I didn't expect to see you here. How long are you staying?" Connor placed his briefcase on the visitor's chair rather than sitting down, a power move I recognized from our childhood when he would tower over me during arguments. "I've been handling Dad's estate matters. The funeral was beautiful, by the way. Mother was devastated that you couldn't attend, but everyone understood the circumstances. The mention of our mother, who had called exactly twice since my accident, and both times had spent more time complaining about hospital visiting hours than asking about my condition, caused familiar tightness in my chest. Our family had never been particularly warm, but Dad had always been the emotional anchor that kept us connected. "Did they read the will?" I asked, steering the conversation toward practical matters. Dad and I had discussed his estate plans many times over the years. As his farming partner and the child who had chosen to stay and work the land, I had always understood that Meadowbrook Acres would eventually become my responsibility. A smile flickered across Connor's face, not the sympathetic expression one might expect when visiting an injured sister, but something sharper, more predatory. "That's actually why I'm here," he said, unlatching his briefcase with deliberate movements and withdrawing a thick folder stamped with the logo of Henderson and Associates, Dad's longtime attorneys. "There have been some significant changes to Dad's estate planning that you need to understand." I struggled to sit up straighter in the hospital bed, wincing as pain shot through my still-healing ribs. "What kind of changes?" 3 months before he died, Dad revised his will, Connor continued, his voice taking on the practiced neutrality of the investment banker he had become. Substantial revisions that reflect his evolved thinking about the farm's future and management. The room seemed to grow colder as he spoke. For 26 years, since I was 8 years old and announced that I wanted to be a farmer like Daddy, the plan had been clear. I would inherit Meadowbrook Acres. I had studied agricultural science at State University, had worked alongside Dad every day since graduation, had sacrificed relationships and opportunities to dedicate myself completely to preserving and improving our family's agricultural legacy. He left the farmhouse to Mother, Connor continued, consulting the documents with theatrical precision. The equipment and livestock are to be liquidated with proceeds divided among various agricultural charities. The investment accounts and savings are distributed between educational scholarships and church donations. My mind raced to process this information. Dad had always been generous with charitable giving, but the systematic dismantling of the farm's operational assets made no sense. "And the land?" I asked, though something in Connor's expression told me I already knew the answer. Connor closed the folder with a decisive snap. "That inheritance isn't yours anymore," he said, his smile turning cold as I lay in my hospital bed, tubes snaking from my arms like mechanical vines. Dad changed his will before he died. The farm was never meant for you anyway. The bluntness of his statement hit harder than any physical pain I had endured during 6 weeks of recovery. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Dad promised me. We planned the succession together. He helped me design the new irrigation system just 2 months before the accident." "Plans change, Rebecca," Connor interrupted, his tone condescending in a way that transported me back to childhood arguments where he would use his age and size to intimidate me into submission. "People change." Dad finally realized that 1,500 acres of prime real estate shouldn't be wasted on subsistence farming when it could generate substantial returns through proper development. The characterization of our award-winning, profitable agricultural operation as subsistence farming revealed just how little Connor understood or respected what Dad and I had built together. Our farm consistently outperformed regional averages in both yield and profitability, had won state awards for sustainable farming practices, and provided steady employment for 12 local families. "I don't believe you," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady despite the emotional devastation unfolding before me. "Let me see the will." Connor slid the folder back into his briefcase with an air of finality. "The official reading was conducted at Henderson and Associates last week. If you want to review the documents, you'll need to contact them directly once you're mobile again." His eyes lingered on my legs, still elevated and immobilized in traction. "I'm here as a courtesy to ensure you heard the news from family first." The way he emphasized family made it sound like a club from which I was being expelled. I studied his face, searching for some trace of the older brother who had taught me to ride a bike before our parents' relationship had soured his view of family life, but found only a stranger in an expensive suit delivering devastating news, with barely concealed satisfaction. As he reached for the door handle, curiosity, or perhaps cruelty, compelled me to ask one final question. "What happens to Meadowbrook Acres now?" Connor paused, his back to me, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice as he delivered the final blow. Development. The land has been optioned to Pinnacle Properties for a mixed-use commercial and residential project. Shopping centers, luxury condominiums, office complexes. The kind of modern progress that creates real value instead of clinging to outdated agricultural traditions. Each word felt like a physical assault. The thought of bulldozers destroying the soil that 4 generations of Hartwells had carefully cultivated, of concrete covering the fields where I had learned to drive, a tractor where Dad had taught me to read weather patterns and soil conditions. It was almost unbearable. Connor left without another word, the door closing with a soft click that seemed to echo the finality of everything I had just lost. I lay in stunned silence, unable to process the complete destruction of my life's work and future in a single conversation. But as devastating as that moment was, I had no idea that it was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would ultimately reveal the truth about family, loyalty, and the power of secrets buried deeper than any crop root could reach. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The days following Connor's devastating revelation blurred together in a haze of pain medication and crushing despair. I stared at the hospital ceiling tiles, counting them obsessively while trying to make sense of how my entire world had collapsed in a single conversation. 43 tiles in total. I had memorized every water stain, every slight discoloration, anything to distract from the hollow ache that seemed to expand in my chest with each passing hour. Meadowbrook Acres being sold to developers. 4 generations of Hartwell farming legacy reduced to shopping centers and condominiums. The very idea felt like sacrilege, a betrayal not just of me, but of every ancestor who had worked that soil, who had built something sustainable and meaningful from the rich earth of Willowbrook County. My physical therapist, Maria Santos, arrived for our morning session carrying her usual clipboard and encouraging smile, but also something unexpected. A small stack of mail forwarded from my farmhouse. "Thought you might want these," she said, setting the letters on my bedside table. Sometimes staying connected to home helps with recovery. Most of it was the usual collection of bills, agricultural supply catalogs, and get well cards from neighboring farmers and local business owners. But beneath the predictable correspondence lay something that made my heart skip. A cream-colored envelope with my name written in handwriting I recognized immediately, despite the tremor that age had added to the familiar script, Dad's handwriting, on a letter postmarked just 1 week before his death. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope, my eyes immediately going to the date at the top. September 3rd, exactly 12 days before he passed away, and nearly 3 weeks after Connor claimed Dad had changed his will to exclude me. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this letter, then I have departed this world, and I suspect that certain developments regarding Meadowbrook Acres may have caused you confusion, pain, or both. For this, I am deeply sorry, though I hope you will understand that appearances can sometimes be deceiving, and patience has always been the virtue that separates the strategic farmer from the reactive one. Do you remember our conversations about crop rotation? How sometimes you must let a field appear fallow, unproductive to outside observers, while secretly preparing the soil for an even more abundant future harvest. Life occasionally requires similar tactics when dealing with family, members who mistake manipulation for business acumen. My breath caught in my throat. Dad's words seemed to suggest that whatever Connor had orchestrated wasn't the complete picture. I read on with growing amazement and hope. The small brass key enclosed with this letter opens the safety deposit box at Riverside National Bank. Box number 247. I've maintained this box for 20 years, though I never mentioned it because I hoped such precautions would prove unnecessary. Seek it out when you are able, but tell no one. Not your mother, certainly not your brother, and not even the bank personnel beyond what's required for access. What you find there will provide complete clarity about my true intentions for Meadowbrook Acres and the reasons why I allowed certain legal documents to be prepared that may not reflect my actual wishes. The letter continued, but I had to pause to process what I was reading. A safety deposit box that Connor didn't know about? Legal documents that didn't reflect Dad's actual wishes? My hands shook as I continued reading. Until you can access the box, focus on your healing. The Hartwell determination runs stronger in your veins than anyone else in our family line, and I have complete faith in your ability to navigate whatever storms Connor may have set in motion. Remember what I taught you about reading weather patterns. Sometimes the darkest clouds precede the most nourishing rain. Trust in the season cycle, my dear daughter. What appears to be ending may simply be preparing for a new beginning. All my love and confidence, Dad. P.S. The farmer who plans ahead weathers any drought. Look for the irrigation records in the box. They document more than water distribution. Turn the envelope upside down, and a small brass key slid into my palm. It was older than the modern keys I was used to, with intricate engravings along its shaft and a distinctive circular head that bore the Riverside National Bank logo from decades past. For the first time since Connor's visit, I felt something other than despair. Hope, tentative and fragile, but real nonetheless. Dad had anticipated something. He had taken precautions. The man who had taught me to always have backup plans for crop failure, equipment breakdowns, and market fluctuations had apparently applied the same strategic thinking to family dynamics. But accessing a safety deposit box in my current condition seemed impossible. I was still weeks away from discharge, my mobility limited to painful supervised walks around the hospital ward with a walker. The bank was 40 minutes away in downtown Willowbrook, and even when I was eventually released, I would need assistance with transportation and mobility. Good news? Maria asked, noticing my changed expression as she prepared to help me with my physical therapy exercises. I clutched the letter protectively. Maybe. I'm not sure yet. I studied Maria's kind face, remembering all the extra time she had spent with me during the darkest days of my recovery, often staying past her scheduled shifts when the night seemed too long and the pain too overwhelming. Maria, can I ask you something personal? Of course, Rebecca. What's on your mind? Do you know anyone who might be willing to help with a small favor? Something that requires discretion and maybe a trip to the bank? Maria's expression grew curious but not judgmental. Throughout my hospitalization, she had listened to my concerns about the farm, about Connor's surprising control over the estate, about my fears for the future of Meadowbrook Acres. She understood that there were complicated family dynamics at play. What kind of favor? She asked gently, helping me adjust my position in the bed. I made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I need to access something my father left for me, but I can't leave the hospital yet. And I have reasons to believe that certain family members shouldn't know about it. Maria considered this for a moment, her professional training as a physical therapist having taught her to recognize when patients were dealing with more than just physical injuries. My cousin Elena works at Riverside National Bank, she said, quietly. She's in customer service, has been there for 8 years, very trustworthy, very discreet. Would she be willing to help someone she doesn't know? I asked, hope growing stronger despite my caution. Elena has a soft spot for people dealing with family difficulties, Maria replied. Her own father passed away last year, and there were some complications with his estate that she had to navigate. She might understand your situation better than most. I looked down at the brass key in my palm, then back at Dad's letter with its cryptic references to irrigation records and planning ahead. Whatever was in that safety deposit box, Dad had believed it was important enough to keep secret from the rest of the family for 20 years. Could you ask her if she'd be willing to meet with me? Here at the hospital? I can explain what I need and see if she's comfortable helping. Maria nodded slowly. I'll call her tonight. Elena's shifts end at 4 p.m., so she could visit tomorrow evening if she's interested. That night, sleep eluded me as my mind raced through possibilities. What could Dad have stored in a secret safety deposit box for 20 years? The reference to irrigation records was particularly intriguing. I knew every detail of our farm's water management systems, had helped design and implement most of the current infrastructure myself. What could irrigation records reveal beyond water distribution patterns? By morning, my anticipation had reached almost unbearable levels. Every hour felt like a day as I waited for visiting hours, for Maria's return, for news about whether Elena would be willing to help a stranger navigate what appeared to be a complex family conspiracy. At precisely 6 p.m., Maria arrived with a woman I didn't recognize, petite, professional-looking, with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair that suggested someone who had faced her own share of challenges. "Rebecca, this is my cousin Elena Vasquez," Maria said, making introductions with the careful formality of someone facilitating a delicate negotiation. "Elena, this is Rebecca Hartwell, the patient I told you about." Elena approached my bedside. With the confident bearing of someone accustomed to helping people with financial matters. "Maria explained that you're dealing with some estate complications," she said directly. "I lost my father recently too, and I know how difficult it can be when family members have different ideas about inheritance and legacy." I nodded, immediately sensing that Elena understood the complexities involved. "It's more complicated than typical estate issues," I admitted. "I have reason to believe my father left important information for me in a safety deposit box, but I'm concerned that other family members might try to prevent me from accessing it if they knew about it." Elena's expression grew more serious. "What kind of information?" I showed her Dad's letter, watching her read it carefully. When she finished, she looked up with an expression of recognition and concern. "Your father was very careful about this," she observed. 20 years of maintaining a safety deposit box in secret suggests he was planning for exactly this kind of situation. She paused, studying my face. "Rebecca, I should tell you something that might be relevant. Your brother Connor was at the bank 2 weeks ago, asking about any accounts or boxes associated with your father's name. We told him we had found no additional accounts beyond the ones he already knew about. Did you lie to him?" I asked, surprised by Elena's revelation. "We told him the truth as we understood it," Elena replied carefully. "The safety deposit box is listed under a business name, Hartwell Agricultural Holdings, not your father's personal name. Technically, it wasn't associated with Samuel Hartwell's individual accounts." This news filled me with both relief and increased curiosity. Dad had been even more strategic than I had initially realized, hiding the safety deposit box under a business name that Connor apparently didn't know existed. "So you could help me access it?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. Elena nodded slowly. "As long as you have proper identification and the key, accessing your own family's safety deposit box is completely legitimate. And given what Maria has told me about your situation and what I've observed about your brother's behavior at the bank, I think your father's precautions were probably justified." She leaned closer to my bedside, lowering her voice slightly. "Rebecca, I can arrange to meet you at the bank this Saturday morning, early, before we're too busy with regular customers. That would give us privacy and time to examine whatever your father left without attracting attention." For the first time since the accident, since Connor's devastating news, since learning that everything I had worked for appeared to be lost, I felt genuine hope. Dad had planned ahead. He had anticipated Connor's actions and taken countermeasures. Whatever was in that safety deposit box might change everything. "Yes," I said firmly, gripping the brass key tighter. "Saturday morning, whatever my father left for me, it's time to find out what he really intended for Meadowbrook Acres." As Elena and Maria departed, making plans for Saturday's expedition to uncover Dad's secrets, I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks. The darkest clouds might indeed precede the most nourishing rain, and I was finally ready to see what kind of harvest Dad had been preparing in secret. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp October air that always reminded me of harvest season, though this year the familiar autumn scents carried a bittersweet weight. Elena had arranged to meet me at Riverside National Bank at 8 a.m., 30 minutes before their official opening, ensuring our privacy and discretion. The challenge was getting there in my current condition. Maria had offered to drive me, but we quickly realized that my mobility limitations created complications we hadn't anticipated. I still required a wheelchair for distances longer than a few steps, my pelvis healing slower than the doctors had initially projected. The external fixator on my left leg made getting in and out of vehicles a complex process requiring assistance and careful maneuvering. My brother Carlos has a medical transport van, Maria suggested during our Friday evening planning session. He runs a small business helping elderly patients get to appointments. Very reliable, very discreet, and the van has a wheelchair lift. I hesitated, uncomfortable with involving another person in what was already feeling like an elaborate conspiracy. But the alternative, asking Connor or my mother for transportation, would immediately expose Dad's secret and potentially compromise whatever advantages the safety deposit box might contain. "Can Carlos be trusted not to mention this to anyone?" I asked, recognizing that my options were limited but wanting to maintain as much security as possible. "Carlos minds his own business," Maria assured me. "He's transported people dealing with family legal issues before. He understands the importance of confidentiality." That's how I found myself being carefully transferred into a white medical van at 7:15 a.m. on a Saturday morning, feeling like I was participating in some kind of covert operation rather than simply visiting a bank. Carlos Santos, a quiet man in his 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands, operated the wheelchair lift with practiced efficiency while maintaining the professional discretion his sister had promised. The drive to downtown Willowbrook took 25 minutes through countryside that had been my whole world for 26 years. We passed the Morrison Dairy Farm where I had worked summers during high school, the grain elevator where Dad and I delivered our harvests each fall, the agricultural supply store where I knew every employee by name. Each familiar landmark reminded me of what was at stake, not just my personal inheritance, but an entire way of life that was threatened by Connor's development plans. Elena met us at the bank's employee entrance, her professional demeanor reassuring as she helped coordinate my wheelchair transfer from the van. "We'll have complete privacy," she confirmed as she led us through empty corridors to the safety deposit box area. "Saturday morning security staff are minimal, and I've arranged for us to use the private consultation room. The safety deposit box area felt like a vault from another era, all polished marble and brass fixtures that spoke to the bank's century-long history serving Willowbrook County's agricultural community. Elena located box 247 with practiced efficiency, then stepped back to allow me privacy for the opening. "Take all the time you need," she said gently. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." My hands trembled slightly as I inserted Dad's brass key into the lock. The mechanism turned smoothly, as if recently maintained, and the long metal box slid out with surprising weight. Whatever Dad had stored here, it was substantial. I transferred the box to the consultation table and lifted the lid, my breath catching at what I discovered inside. This wasn't just a collection of important documents. It was a complete archive that documented 20 years of careful planning and strategic thinking. On top lay a thick folder labeled Rebecca's Inheritance Protection Plan in Dad's familiar handwriting. Beneath that were multiple sealed envelopes marked with specific dates, suggesting a timeline of preparations. Bank records, legal documents, photographs, even what appeared to be audio recordings stored on small digital devices. I opened the main folder first, finding a letter addressed to me and dated nearly 2 years earlier. "Rebecca, if you're reading this, then Connor has likely moved forward with plans I hoped he would abandon. For the past 3 years, your brother has been pressuring me to sell Meadowbrook Acres for development, becoming increasingly aggressive when I refused. His financial situation, which he believes I know nothing about, has deteriorated significantly due to poor investment choices and lifestyle expenses beyond his banking salary. My eyes widened as I continued reading. Dad had known about Connor's financial problems for years, and Connor had been pressuring him to sell the farm long before Dad's death? 6 months ago, Connor brought me documents suggesting that you had been secretly negotiating with developers behind my back, planning to sell your inheritance immediately upon receiving it. The evidence he presented was convincing. Emails, signed letters of intent, even recorded phone conversations of someone who sounded remarkably like you discussing terms with Pinnacle Properties. Of course, I knew immediately that these were fabrications. You would never betray everything we've built together. But the sophistication of the forgeries concerned me greatly. Connor had invested significant time and resources into creating false evidence of your supposed betrayal. I felt sick reading about Connor's elaborate deception, but Dad's next words provided hope. I pretended to believe Connor's evidence, agreeing to change my will to exclude you from inheriting Meadowbrook Acres. However, what Connor doesn't know is that 3 weeks before signing that document, I created a different legal arrangement altogether. Dad reached for a thick document from the bottom of the folder, and I could see the official seal of Willowbrook County Court. This is an irrevocable agricultural preservation trust, properly executed and filed with the county clerk's office. Meadowbrook Acres, along with all equipment, livestock, and operating capital, has been placed in this trust with you named as sole trustee and beneficiary. The farm cannot be sold for non-agricultural purposes or substantially altered without violating the trust terms, which would trigger a reversion clause directing all assets to the State Agricultural College. I stared at the document in amazement. Connor's inheritance was meaningless. He had manipulated Dad into changing a will that no longer controlled the farm's ownership. Dad had outmaneuvered him completely. The will Connor worked so hard to influence leaves him ownership of assets that legally no longer exist in my estate. Meadowbrook Acres belongs to you through the trust, regardless of what any subsequent will might state. But there was more. Dad had documented everything. Bank records showing Connor's mounting debts, forensic analysis of the forged documents bearing my supposed signature, even recorded conversations where Connor discussed his plans with associates from Pinnacle Properties. In these recordings, you'll hear Connor explaining how he planned to manipulate an elderly farmer near the end of his life, how he researched voice cloning technology to create the fake phone conversations, and how he coordinated with Pinnacle Properties to ensure maximum profit from the development deal. I found the digital recorder Dad had referenced, along with detailed transcripts of conversations that revealed the full scope of Connor's deception. The betrayal was even deeper than I had imagined. This wasn't a spontaneous decision driven by financial desperation, but a calculated scheme that had been in development for over a year. Rebecca, I'm leaving the final decision about how to use this information to you. You can expose Connor's fraud immediately, which would likely result in criminal charges, or you can proceed more strategically. Remember what I taught you about timing in farming. Sometimes the best harvest comes from patience rather than haste. The remainder of the safety deposit box contained supporting documentation that built an irrefutable case. Copies of Connor's bank statements showing failed investments and mounting debt. Email communications between Connor and Pinnacle Properties dating back 18 months. Technical analysis of the voice recordings proving they had been artificially generated. Most shocking was a series of photographs showing Connor meeting with Pinnacle Properties executives at expensive restaurants in the city, apparently celebrating their planned acquisition of prime agricultural land at below-market prices, due to family manipulation. As I reviewed document after document, my understanding of the situation completely transformed. This wasn't simply a brother choosing financial gain over family loyalty. This was premeditated fraud involving multiple parties, sophisticated forgery techniques, and a calculated plan to steal generational wealth through elder manipulation. Dad's final letter in the box provided guidance that felt like a conversation from beyond the grave. The choice of how to proceed is yours, my dear daughter. You could contact authorities immediately and watch Connor face the consequences of his actions. Or you could choose a more strategic approach that might achieve justice while preserving the possibility of family healing. Whatever you decide, know that Meadowbrook Acres is protected. The trust ensures that our family's agricultural legacy will continue through you, and no amount of manipulation or legal maneuvering can change that fundamental truth. I closed the safety deposit box, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I had discovered. Dad hadn't just protected my inheritance. He had created a comprehensive case that could destroy Connor professionally and legally. The question was whether I wanted to use that power for immediate justice or something more nuanced. Elena knocked softly on the consultation room door. "Rebecca, how are you doing in there?" "I'm ready," I called back, though I felt anything but ready to navigate the complex decisions ahead. The evidence was clear, the legal protections were in place, and Connor's scheme was completely exposed, but as I prepared to leave the bank with Dad's revelations, I realized that the most difficult part of this journey was just beginning. I now held the power to determine not just the fate of Meadowbrook Acres, but the future of my entire family. The question was, what would Dad have wanted me to do with that power? The ride back from Riverside National Bank passed in contemplative silence, my mind reeling from the magnitude of Dad's revelations. Carlos navigated the rural roads with practiced ease while I sat in my wheelchair, clutching a manila envelope containing copies of the most crucial documents from the safety deposit box. The original materials remained secure at the bank, but I now had everything needed to understand the full scope of Connor's deception and Dad's countermeasures. As we approached Willowbrook General Hospital, I realized that my biggest challenge wasn't legal or financial. It was logistical. How could I implement any strategy while confined to a hospital bed, dependent on others for basic mobility, and weeks away from discharge? The evidence was overwhelming, the legal protections were in place, but I remained physically powerless to act on Dad's carefully laid plans. "Maria," I said as we completed the transfer back to my hospital room, "I need to ask you something important, and I'll understand completely if you say no." She helped me settle into bed before responding, her expression curious but patient. "What do you need, Rebecca?" "I need allies, people I can trust completely, who understand what's at stake here." I gestured toward the envelope containing Dad's documents. "What I found today changes everything, but I can't act on it alone, not in my current condition." Maria sat down in the visitor's chair, giving me her full attention. "Tell me what you discovered." I spent the next hour explaining Dad's agricultural preservation trust, the evidence of Connor's fraud, and the recordings that documented his conspiracy with Pinnacle Properties. Maria listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious as the full picture emerged. "Your father was incredibly thorough," she observed when I finished. "But you're right about needing help. What kind of assistance are you thinking about?" "I need someone who can make phone calls, schedule meetings, coordinate with attorneys, basically be my representative in the outside world while I'm stuck here." I paused, recognizing the weight of what I was asking. "But it has to be someone Connor doesn't know about. Someone who can operate without attracting his attention." Maria considered this carefully. "My husband Roberto might be able to help. He's a paralegal at Gonzalez and Martinez, the firm that handles a lot of agricultural law in the county. He's experienced with estate issues and land trusts, plus he understands the importance of discretion in family legal matters." The suggestion felt like a lifeline. Would he be willing to meet with me, even if it means getting involved in what's essentially a family war? "Roberto has strong feelings about people who try to cheat farmers out of their land," Maria replied, with a slight smile. His own grandfather lost the family farm to predatory lending practices in the 1980s. He might see your situation as a chance to prevent history from repeating itself. That evening, Roberto Martinez arrived at the hospital carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the professional demeanor of someone accustomed to complex legal situations. He was younger than I had expected, perhaps 35, with the calm confidence that comes from years of helping people navigate bureaucratic and legal challenges. Maria explained the basic situation, he said, settling into the bedside chair. But I'd like to hear the details directly from you, especially regarding the trust documentation and the evidence your father collected. I walked Roberto through everything: Dad's secret planning, the Agricultural Preservation Trust, Connor's fraudulent manipulation, and the recordings that documented the conspiracy. Roberto took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated his familiarity with estate law and agricultural protection statutes. "This is actually more straightforward than many cases I've seen," he observed after reviewing Dad's trust documents. "Your father's legal work was excellent. The Agricultural Preservation Trust is bulletproof, properly executed, correctly filed, and designed specifically to prevent the kind of manipulation your brother attempted." "So Meadowbrook Acres is really protected?" I asked, still struggling to believe that Dad had outsmarted Connor so completely. "Absolutely. The will your brother manipulated is essentially meaningless. He can't sell what legally belongs to the trust, and he can't alter what's already been preserved for agricultural use." Roberto flipped through his notes. "The question is, how you want to handle the fraud evidence. You have enough documentation to pursue criminal charges, civil litigation, or both." I had been wrestling with this decision since leaving the bank. "What would you recommend?" Roberto leaned back in his chair, considering the options. "That depends on your goals. Do you want maximum punishment for your brother, or do you want to focus on protecting the farm and deterring future interference?" The question forced me to examine my motivations. Was I seeking revenge for Connor's betrayal, or was I primarily concerned with ensuring Meadowbrook Acres remained safe? "I want Connor to face consequences for what he did, but I also don't want to completely destroy him if there's another way." "Then I'd suggest a strategic approach," Roberto replied. "We could use the evidence to force Connor into a position where he has to choose between accepting accountability or facing full prosecution. Give him a chance to make things right while keeping the serious consequences as backup." This resonated with something Dad had written about timing and strategic patience. What would that look like practically? Roberto opened his portfolio and withdrew a legal pad. "First, we establish your uncontestable position by officially activating the trust and notifying all relevant parties: Connor, Pinnacle Properties, your father's attorney, and the county clerk's office. This makes it clear that any development plans are legally impossible." He continued outlining the strategy. "Second, we approach Connor privately with a summary of the evidence, giving him an opportunity to explain his actions and discuss potential restitution. If he's cooperative, we might resolve this without public exposure or criminal charges." "And if he's not cooperative?" I asked. "Then we proceed with full legal action: criminal fraud charges, civil litigation for damages, professional complaints against any attorneys involved, and complete public disclosure of his attempted manipulation of an elderly farmer." Roberto's expression grew serious. "The evidence is strong enough that he would likely face significant jail time and financial penalties." The strategy felt balanced, offering Connor a path toward redemption while ensuring serious consequences if he chose to continue his deception. "How quickly could we implement this?" "I can begin tomorrow," Roberto confirmed. "The trust activation paperwork can be filed Monday morning. We could have initial notifications delivered to all parties by Tuesday. If you want to approach Connor first, we could arrange that meeting by Wednesday or Thursday." I felt a surge of energy and purpose that I hadn't experienced since the accident. Finally, I had a plan that could honor Dad's legacy while addressing Connor's betrayal appropriately. "Let's do it, all of it." Roberto made additional notes, then looked up with a question I hadn't anticipated. "Rebecca, have you considered what happens after this immediate crisis is resolved? The farm is protected, but you'll need to think about long-term management, especially while you're recovering." The question highlighted another challenge I had been avoiding. Even with legal ownership secured, I couldn't physically run Meadowbrook Acres from a hospital bed. The fall harvest was approaching, equipment needed maintenance, and 12 families depended on the farm for their livelihoods. "I've been so focused on fighting Connor that I haven't planned beyond that," I admitted. The farm manager, Tom Rodriguez, has been handling day-to-day operations since Dad passed, but he can't make major decisions indefinitely. "We should include operational continuity in our strategy," Roberto suggested. "The trust documentation probably addresses management succession, but we'll want to ensure Tom has clear authority to continue operations while you recover." This practical concern grounded me in the reality beyond the immediate legal battle. Meadowbrook Acres wasn't just a symbolic inheritance or a weapon against Connor's greed. It was a working farm that needed consistent leadership and decision-making. "There's something else," Roberto added, consulting his notes. "Based on what?" "You've told me about Pinnacle Properties' involvement. They may have invested significant resources in planning the development project. When they discover the land isn't available for sale, they might try to pressure Connor or even attempt legal challenges to the trust." I hadn't considered this possibility. "Could they break the trust somehow?" "Extremely unlikely, given how well your father structured it. But they might try to create complications or delays, especially if they have advance purchase agreements or investor commitments based on acquiring Meadowbrook Acres." Roberto closed his portfolio. "We should be prepared for them to fight this, not just accept defeat quietly." As Roberto prepared to leave, promising to begin the legal process first thing Monday morning, I felt cautiously optimistic for the first time since the accident. Dad's planning had been even more comprehensive than I had initially realized, and now I had competent allies who understood both the legal complexities and the agricultural stakes involved. "One final question," I said, as Roberto reached the door. "Do you think Dad would approve of this approach, offering Connor a chance to make amends rather than immediately pursuing maximum punishment?" Roberto smiled. "From what you've told me about your father, he was a man who believed in consequences but also in redemption. This strategy honors both principles." He paused thoughtfully. "Besides, sometimes the most powerful lesson comes not from being destroyed, but from understanding how close you came to destroying yourself." After Roberto departed, I lay in bed reviewing the day's developments. In less than 24 hours, I had gone from hopeless victim to strategic planner with competent allies and a clear path forward. Dad's letter had promised that the darkest clouds precede the most nourishing rain, and I was finally beginning to see the first breaks in the storm. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Monday morning arrived with the efficiency of a well-oiled farming operation. By 9 a.m., Roberto had filed the Agricultural Preservation Trust activation paperwork with Willowbrook County's clerk office, officially establishing my legal authority over Meadowbrook Acres. By 10:30 a.m., certified letters were en route to Connor, Pinnacle Properties, Henderson and Associates law firm, and the County Planning Commission, notifying them that the property was legally protected from non-agricultural development. But the real action began Tuesday afternoon when Roberto returned to my hospital room with news that the initial notifications had already triggered responses. "Connor called my office 4 times today," Roberto reported, settling into the now familiar bedside chair with his legal portfolio. Increasingly agitated with each call, he went from demanding explanations to threatening legal action to finally requesting an immediate meeting. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, part anxiety, part anticipation. "What did you tell him?" "That we'd be happy to meet, but only if he brings legal representation and comes prepared to discuss the fraud evidence we've uncovered." Roberto consulted his notes. I also made it clear that this would be his only opportunity to address the situation before we proceed with formal complaints. The psychological pressure was working exactly as planned. Connor was discovering that his carefully orchestrated manipulation had been anticipated and countered by someone much more strategic than he had given credit to. Did Pinnacle Properties respond? That's where things get interesting, Roberto replied, his expression growing more serious. Their attorney, Margaret Chen from Harrison and Associates, called to schedule a meeting. But according to her, Pinnacle Properties has already invested nearly $2 million in development planning, site preparation studies, and investor commitments based on Connor's assurances that the land would be available for purchase. The magnitude of the financial implications hit me immediately. $2 million? Environmental impact studies, architectural planning, infrastructure assessments, marketing materials. Apparently, they were very confident about acquiring Meadowbrook Acres. Roberto flipped through several pages of notes. Ms. Chen was careful. Not to admit any wrongdoing, but she clearly indicated that Pinnacle Properties expected Connor to deliver on his promises regardless of any family complications. This revelation transformed my understanding of the pressure Connor was facing. He wasn't just dealing with the collapse of his inheritance scheme. He was potentially liable to a major development company for millions of dollars in wasted investments. What happens if Connor can't deliver the land to Pinnacle Properties? Breach of contract, potentially fraudulent misrepresentation, possible criminal charges if they can prove he knew he couldn't deliver what he promised. Roberto's expression was grim. Connor's in much deeper trouble than just family estate fraud. He's dealing with major commercial liability. The irony wasn't lost on me. Connor's attempt to steal my inheritance had trapped him in legal and financial consequences far worse than anything he had tried to inflict on me. Dad's strategic planning had not only protected Meadowbrook Acres, but had also ensured that Connor's betrayal would carry proportional consequences. There's more, Roberto continued. Tom Rodriguez called this morning. Apparently, Connor visited the farm yesterday, attempting to convince the workers that he was now the legal owner and that major changes were coming. Tom refused to recognize Connor's authority without proper documentation, and Connor became aggressive. My protective instincts toward the farm workers who had become like family over the years flared immediately. Aggressive how? Verbal intimidation, threats about employment termination, claims that he would be bringing in a professional management company to replace local workers with more efficient operations. Roberto's tone conveyed his distaste for Connor's tactics. Tom stood his ground, but several workers are concerned about job security. This attack on the people who depended on Meadowbrook Acres for their livelihoods crossed a line that made any consideration of mercy toward Connor much more difficult. We need to resolve this quickly before Connor causes more damage. I agree. Which brings me to the plan for Thursday's meeting. Roberto opened a fresh page in his notebook. I've arranged for us to meet at Gonzalez and Martinez's conference room. Neutral territory, professional setting, and proper recording equipment to document whatever agreements we reach. The mention of recording equipment reminded me of Dad's own evidence-gathering strategy. Will Connor be required to attend, or could he send legal representation? Given the personal nature of the fraud charges, we've insisted that Connor attend. Personally, though he's welcome to bring his attorney. Roberto smiled slightly. His current lawyer is David Morrison from Henderson and Associates, the same firm that originally handled your father's will. There may be some uncomfortable conflicts of interest to navigate. I felt a surge of anticipation mixed with nervousness. Thursday would be my first face-to-face encounter with Connor since his cold announcement of my disinheritance. The power dynamic would be completely reversed. I would hold all the evidence and legal advantages while he faced potential criminal and civil consequences. What's our strategy for the meeting? Roberto had clearly thought this through carefully. We start by presenting the trust documentation. establishing beyond doubt that Meadowbrook Acres is legally protected and cannot be developed. That eliminates any remaining questions about property ownership. He continued outlining the approach. Then we present the evidence of fraud, the forged documents, the voice recordings, the communications with Pinnacle Properties. We make it clear that we have a complete case for criminal prosecution. And then, we offer him a choice. Accept responsibility, make appropriate restitution, and agree to cease all interference with farm operations, or face full legal consequences, including criminal charges, civil litigation, and professional sanctions. The strategy felt both firm and fair, offering Connor an opportunity to minimize his consequences through cooperation, while ensuring accountability for his actions. What kind of restitution are we talking about? Roberto consulted his notes. Financial compensation for legal fees, investigative costs, and operational disruption to the farm. Community service related to agricultural education or elder protection. Public acknowledgement of his attempted fraud to deter similar schemes, and complete withdrawal from any involvement in Meadowbrook Acres operations. The terms seemed reasonable given the severity of Connor's betrayal, though I wondered whether his financial situation would make meaningful restitution possible. Can Connor afford significant financial penalties, given his debt problems? That's part of what we'll discover Thursday. If he's genuinely unable to pay substantial restitution due to his financial situation, we might need to adjust our terms toward non-monetary consequences. Roberto looked up from his notes. The goal is accountability and protection for the farm, not financial destruction. Wednesday passed slowly as I prepared mentally for the confrontation. Maria helped me practice transferring from wheelchair to conference table, ensuring I could participate in the meeting with dignity, despite my physical limitations. Roberto arranged for a medical transport van to bring me to his law firm, understanding that appearing strong and competent would be important for psychological advantage. That evening, as I reviewed Dad's letters one final time, I found a passage that seemed particularly relevant to the approaching meeting. Remember, Rebecca, that true strength in negotiation comes not from the ability to destroy your opponent, but from the wisdom to offer them a path toward better choices. Justice should heal more than it hurts, whenever possible. Dad's words reminded me that Thursday's meeting wasn't just about defeating Connor or protecting Meadowbrook Acres. It was about finding a resolution that honored the values Dad had tried to instill in both his children. Roberto called Wednesday evening with a final update. Connor confirmed he'll attend with his attorney. Pinnacle Properties requested permission to have a representative present, which we declined. This is a family matter that needs to be resolved before addressing their commercial concerns. How did Connor sound when he confirmed? Subdued. Very different from the aggressive tone in his earlier calls. Roberto paused thoughtfully. I think he's beginning to understand the full scope of the evidence against him and the consequences he's facing. As I prepared for sleep Wednesday night, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Anticipation for finally confronting Connor with the truth. Nervousness about the meeting's outcome. Determination to protect Meadowbrook Acres and its workers. And underneath it all, a profound sadness that Dad's death had revealed such ugly truths about our family dynamics. Thursday would bring resolution, one way or another. Connor would either accept responsibility for his actions and agree to make amends, or he would face the full weight of the evidence Dad had so carefully compiled. Either way, Meadowbrook Acres would be protected, and Dad's agricultural legacy would continue through me. That fundamental victory was already secured, regardless of Thursday's negotiations. But I couldn't help hoping that Connor would choose the path of accountability and potential redemption, rather than the path that led to complete family destruction. The meeting that would determine our family's future was less than 18 hours away. Thursday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that had always energized me during harvest season, though today the familiar October air carried weight beyond seasonal change. By 1:30 p.m., I was seated in the conference room at Gonzalez and Martinez, positioned strategically at the head of the polished oak table with Roberto beside me, and all of Dad's evidence organized in neat folders within easy reach. At precisely 2 p.m., Connor entered with his attorney, David Morrison from Henderson and Associates. The contrast between the two men was striking. Morrison appeared confident and polished in his expensive suit, while Connor looked haggard, his normally immaculate appearance showing signs of stress that 3 days of mounting pressure had clearly inflicted. Connor's eyes met mine across the table, and for a moment I saw something I hadn't expected: genuine fear. Not the calculated concern of someone worried about financial consequences, but the deeper anxiety of someone who had finally grasped that their carefully constructed deception was completely unraveling. "Thank you both for coming," Roberto began formally, his tone professional but carrying an undertone that suggested this was Connor's last opportunity for reasonable resolution. "Before we discuss potential agreements, we need to establish the facts of the current situation." Roberto placed the Agricultural Preservation Trust documents on the table, spreading them where both Connor and Morrison could examine them clearly. As of Monday morning, these documents have been officially activated and filed with Willowbrook County. Meadowbrook Acres is now legally protected as an agricultural preservation trust, with Rebecca as sole trustee and beneficiary. Morrison studied the documents carefully, his confident expression gradually giving way to something approaching professional alarm. "When were these trust documents executed?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. 3 weeks before Samuel Hartwell signed the will you helped Connor manipulate," Roberto replied evenly. "Which means the will Connor worked so hard to influence has no legal effect on property that was no longer part of Samuel's estate." I watched Connor's face as the full implications registered. All his planning, all his manipulation of Dad, all his coordination with Pinnacle Properties, it had all been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of Dad's true estate planning strategy. "Furthermore," Roberto continued, placing additional documents on the table, "we have comprehensive evidence that Connor's manipulation of his father involved sophisticated fraud, including forged documents and fabricated recordings designed to deceive an elderly man about his daughter's intentions." Morrison leaned forward, examining the fraud evidence with growing concern. "Connor, we need to discuss these allegations privately before proceeding." "No," Connor said quietly, his voice carrying a resignation I had never heard before. "I don't need privacy to acknowledge what I did." He looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room. "Rebecca, I forged documents suggesting you were planning to sell the farm to developers. I used voice cloning software to create fake recordings of you negotiating with Pinnacle Properties. I manipulated Dad when he was grieving and vulnerable, convincing him that his daughter was betraying everything he valued." The admission hit harder than I had expected, even though I had known the truth for days. Hearing Connor describe his betrayal in his own words made the magnitude of his deception more real and more painful. "Why?" I asked, the question emerging before I could stop myself. "Why would you do something so calculated and cruel?" Connor was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands folded on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that suggested this confession had been building for days. "I was desperate. Bad investments, lifestyle expenses I couldn't afford on my banking salary, debts that were becoming impossible to manage." He looked up, meeting my eyes again. "When Pinnacle Properties approached me about developing Meadowbrook Acres, they offered enough money to solve all my financial problems and set me up for life." Morrison placed a restraining hand on Connor's arm, clearly uncomfortable with such detailed admissions, but Connor continued without acknowledging the gesture. "At first, I thought I could convince Dad to sell voluntarily, but when he refused, when he made it clear that the farm was your inheritance and your calling, I couldn't accept it." Connor's voice grew quieter. "I convinced myself that you didn't really understand the financial value of what you were inheriting, that you were naive about business and development opportunities. The condescension in his reasoning, even in confession, sparked anger that I struggled to control. So, you decided to steal my inheritance because you thought you knew better than Dad and me about our own family legacy? I told myself I was protecting the family's financial interests, that agricultural land was an inefficient use of such valuable property. Connor shook his head, seeming to recognize how hollow his justification sounded. But the truth is, I was selfish and desperate, and I manipulated a grieving father to steal from his daughter. Morrison had grown increasingly pale as Connor's admissions continued. Mr. Hartwell, I strongly advise against making these statements without legal protection, Connor interrupted, looking at his attorney with something approaching contempt. David, we both know that your firm helped me manipulate the will, even if you didn't know about the forged evidence. How much legal protection do you think either of us actually has? This revelation about Henderson and Associates' involvement suggested the scandal might extend beyond Connor's individual actions. Roberto made a note, clearly recognizing the potential for additional professional consequences beyond Connor's personal liability. Connor, I said, finding my voice despite the emotional weight of his confessions. Dad knew. He knew everything you were doing, documented all of it, and created the trust specifically to protect Meadowbrook Acres from your manipulation. Connor nodded slowly. I'm beginning to understand that. The man I thought I was deceiving was actually several steps ahead of me the entire time. He managed a bitter smile. Dad always was the better strategist. Which brings us to the current situation, Roberto interjected, steering the conversation toward resolution. Connor's admissions confirm our evidence, but we still need to address the consequences and determine how to move forward. Morrison attempted to regain control of the discussion. My client's statements today don't constitute legal admissions that can be used in court proceedings. If you intend to pursue criminal charges, we're offering an alternative to criminal charges, Roberto interrupted firmly. But only if Connor agrees to specific terms that address the damage he's caused and ensure he doesn't interfere with farm operations in the future. I leaned forward, taking control of the conversation for the first time. Connor, You arrested today. The evidence is overwhelming. The financial damage to Pinnacle Properties creates additional liability, and your manipulation of our elderly father constitutes serious criminal fraud. Connor nodded, acknowledging the severity of his position without attempting to minimize it. But Dad taught me that justice should heal more than it hurts, whenever possible, I continued, remembering his letter's guidance about wisdom in negotiation. So I'm offering you a choice. Accept responsibility, make appropriate restitution, and commit to completely withdrawing from any involvement with Meadowbrook Acres, or face full criminal prosecution and civil litigation. What kind of restitution? Morrison asked, apparently resigned to negotiating consequences rather than denying guilt. Roberto consulted his prepared list. Financial compensation for legal fees and investigative costs, community service with organizations that protect elderly people from financial exploitation, public acknowledgement of the attempted fraud to help prevent similar schemes against other farming families, and signed agreements ensuring Connor never attempts to claim any interest in Meadowbrook Acres or interfere with its operations. Connor listened to the terms without objection, his demeanor suggesting he understood these consequences were far more generous than what criminal prosecution would bring. I'll agree to all of that, he said quietly. I'll also resign from my position at the bank and seek employment outside Willowbrook County. My presence here would be a constant reminder of what I did to our family. The offer of self-imposed exile surprised me, suggesting that Connor's remorse might be more genuine than I had expected. But before I could respond, Roberto raised another, crucial issue. There's still the matter of Pinnacle Properties. They've invested $2 million based on your assurances that you could deliver Meadowbrook Acres for development. They're not going to simply walk away from that investment without seeking compensation from someone. Connor's face went pale as he grasped the full scope of his liability. I don't have $2 million. My financial situation is worse than you probably realize. Morrison looked increasingly uncomfortable as the meeting progressed beyond his ability to protect his client from consequences. That's between you and Pinnacle Properties, Roberto replied. But you should understand that they may pursue civil litigation against you personally for fraudulent misrepresentation, regardless of how we resolve the family issues. As the afternoon progressed toward evening, we worked through the details of Connor's accountability agreement, establishing timelines for restitution, specific community service requirements, and legal mechanisms to ensure his compliance with all terms. By 5 p.m., we had reached a comprehensive resolution that protected Meadowbrook Acres, ensured Connor faced appropriate consequences, and avoided the lengthy, expensive, and emotionally devastating process of criminal prosecution. But, as Connor signed the final agreements, I realized that our family's story was far from over. The legal issues were resolved, but the deeper questions about trust, forgiveness, and whether broken relationships could ever be repaired remained unanswered. The real work of healing was just beginning. The week following Connor's confession and signed agreement brought an unexpected sense of calm to my hospital room, though I knew this tranquility was deceptive. The immediate legal crisis had been resolved, but the real work of determining Meadowbrook Acres' future was just beginning. I was no longer fighting to reclaim my inheritance. I was preparing to actively manage and protect it. Roberto visited Friday morning with updates that confirmed our strategy's effectiveness while revealing new complexities I hadn't anticipated. Pinnacle Properties has officially withdrawn their development proposal, he reported, settling into his usual chair with a thick folder of correspondence. But their legal department sent Connor a formal notice of intent to pursue civil litigation for breach of contract and fraudulent misrepresentation. I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. Connor's consequences were appropriate, but the financial devastation he faced seemed almost overwhelming. How much liability is he looking at? Potentially the full $2 million they invested, plus punitive damages if they can prove intentional fraud. Roberto consulted his notes. Connor's attorney is trying to negotiate a settlement, but Pinnacle Properties seems determined to make an example of him. The irony wasn't lost on me. Connor's attempt to steal my inheritance through manipulation had trapped him in financial consequences, far exceeding what he had tried to gain. Dad's strategic planning had ensured that the punishment fit the crime, almost perfectly. What about Henderson and Associates? Are they facing any professional consequences? The State Bar Association has opened an investigation based on the evidence we provided. David Morrison's involvement in facilitating the will change without proper verification of the fraud allegations constitutes a serious ethical violation. Roberto's expression grew more serious. If they find Morrison knew or should have known about Connor's deception, he could face suspension or disbarment. The legal dominoes were falling exactly as Dad had anticipated, creating consequences that extended beyond Connor's individual actions to the professional network that had enabled his scheme. But my attention was increasingly focused on the positive, work ahead rather than the negative consequences behind us. Roberto, I need to start thinking about actually running Meadowbrook Acres again. The trust documentation gives me legal control, but I need to understand the practical requirements for managing operations while I complete my recovery. Roberto nodded, having anticipated this transition. I've reviewed the trust provisions regarding operational management. You have broad authority to make decisions, hire staff, and delegate responsibilities as needed. The key requirement is maintaining the property's agricultural use and ensuring sustainable farming practices. This flexibility was exactly what I needed. Tom Rodriguez has been handling day-to-day operations since Dad's death. He knows the farm better than anyone except me, and the workers trust his judgment completely. I'd like to formalize his role as farm manager while I recover. That's definitely possible. We can create an employment agreement that gives Tom decision-making authority for routine operations while requiring your approval for major changes or expenditures. Roberto made notes as we discussed the structure. This would allow the farm to operate efficiently while you focus on healing and long-term planning. The conversation reminded me of something Dad had written about the importance of building systems that could function regardless of individual circumstances. Meadowbrook Acres needed to be sustainable beyond my personal involvement, especially given the reality that farming involved inherent risks and unexpected challenges. There's something else I want to discuss, I said, an idea that had been developing since reading Dad's letters taking clearer shape. The trust documentation mentions educational purposes as part of the agricultural preservation mission. I'm thinking about creating a formal program that teaches sustainable farming practices to young people. Roberto's expression brightened with interest. That could be powerful. Agricultural education programs often qualify for grants and tax benefits that could help fund farm operations while serving the community. The idea felt like a natural extension of Dad's values and a way to honor his belief in sharing knowledge and supporting the next generation of farmers. Dad always said that good farming techniques needed to be passed down through demonstration, not just classroom instruction. Meadowbrook Acres could provide hands-on learning opportunities for students interested in agriculture. I'll research the legal requirements for establishing educational programs within the trust structure, Roberto offered. This could actually strengthen the preservation protections while creating additional funding sources for farm operations. As Roberto departed with plans to draft the farm management agreements and research educational program requirements, I felt energized by the possibility of transforming my inheritance from something I had fought to protect into something that could benefit the broader community. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Elena Vasquez from Riverside National Bank, carrying a small bouquet of flowers and wearing an expression of genuine concern. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said, settling into the visitor's chair. "Maria mentioned that you'd successfully resolved the legal issues with your inheritance, and I wanted to see how you were doing." Elena's kindness touched me deeply. Her willingness to help a stranger access crucial evidence had been instrumental in implementing Dad's strategy. "I can't thank you enough for what you did. Without your help accessing the safety deposit box, Connor's deception might have succeeded." "I'm just glad your father's planning worked," Elena replied. "But I actually came to discuss something else. The publicity around Connor's situation has made other families in the county more aware of potential estate fraud schemes. Several people have asked about establishing safety deposit boxes or trusts to protect their own agricultural properties. This development suggested that Dad's strategic thinking might benefit families beyond our own, a legacy that extended his protective planning to other farming operations facing similar pressures. Would the bank be interested in offering specialized services for agricultural estate protection? I asked, recognizing an opportunity that could help other families, while honoring Dad's memory. "We're definitely interested. Agricultural families represent a significant portion of our customer base, and protecting their generational wealth aligns with our community mission." Elena's enthusiasm was evident. "Would you be willing to share your father's approach, obviously, without revealing confidential details, to help us develop better protective services for other farming families?" The request felt like a perfect way to transform our family's painful experience into something that could prevent similar betrayals for others. I'd be honored to help. Dad would have loved the idea of his planning protecting other agricultural legacies. As Elena departed with plans to schedule follow-up meetings about the bank's agricultural protection services, I realized that my role was evolving beyond simply inheriting and managing Meadowbrook Acres. I was becoming an advocate for protecting family farms against exploitation and manipulation. That evening, Maria arrived for her usual visit carrying more than her typical physical therapy equipment. "I brought someone I think you'd like to meet," she announced, stepping aside to reveal a woman in her 60s with calloused hands and the sun-weathered complexion that marked a lifetime of outdoor work. "Rebecca, This is Sarah Chen, president of the Willowbrook County Farm Families Association, Maria said, making introductions. Sarah heard about your situation and wanted to discuss something important. Sarah approached my bedside with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to advocating for agricultural interests. Rebecca, your father was respected throughout the county for his farming expertise and ethical business practices. Word about Connor's attempted fraud has spread through the agricultural community, and people are concerned about similar threats to other family farms. I nodded, understanding the broader implications of Connor's scheme. If he could manipulate our family situation so successfully, other families might be vulnerable to similar tactics. Exactly. Which is why the Farm Families Association would like to invite you to speak at our next quarterly meeting about protection strategies and warning signs. Sarah's proposal was direct and practical. Your experience could help other families recognize and prevent elder manipulation schemes before they succeed. The invitation represented another opportunity to transform our painful experience into community protection, extending Dad's wisdom to families facing similar pressures. I'd be honored to speak, I replied immediately. When is your next meeting? December 15th. That should give you time to complete your recovery and prepare a presentation that could help dozens of farming families protect their legacies. Sarah smiled with satisfaction. Your father would be proud to see his daughter using this experience to help others. As Sarah departed with plans to coordinate the speaking engagement, I reflected on how dramatically my situation had transformed. 3 weeks ago, I had been a helpless victim facing the loss of everything I valued. Now I was positioned to become an advocate, educator, and protector for other agricultural families facing similar threats. Dad's strategic planning had accomplished more than protecting Meadowbrook Acres. It had created opportunities for positive impact that extended far beyond our individual family situation. The shift from defensive victim to proactive leader felt empowering in ways I hadn't expected, suggesting that the most meaningful inheritance Dad had left me wasn't the farm itself, but the wisdom to use challenges as opportunities for growth and service to others. The following Monday brought news that shifted the entire dynamic of our situation in ways I hadn't anticipated. Roberto arrived at my hospital room with an urgency that immediately caught my attention, his usual calm demeanor replaced with something approaching excitement, mixed with concern. Rebecca, we have a significant development, he announced, settling into his chair with a thick manila folder that looked official and ominous. Connor contacted my office this morning requesting an emergency meeting, but this time he's not coming alone. I felt my pulse quicken. What do you mean? He's bringing Margaret Chen, Pinnacle Properties' lead attorney, and apparently some kind of investigator they've hired. Roberto opened the folder, revealing documents I didn't recognize. It seems Connor's confession last week triggered something none of us expected. Pinnacle Properties has been conducting their own investigation into how they were deceived. The implications began dawning on me. What kind of investigation? According to Connor's attorney, Pinnacle Properties discovered that Connor wasn't their only source of information about Meadowbrook Acres. Someone else has been feeding them details about your family's financial situation, your father's health status, and the farm's operational vulnerabilities. Roberto's expression grew more serious. They think there's a larger conspiracy involving multiple people. This revelation completely recontextualized everything I thought I understood about Connor's scheme. You're saying Connor had help? More than help. It appears he was part of a coordinated effort involving at least 2 other individuals who had access to confidential information about your family and the farm. Roberto consulted his notes. Pinnacle Properties wants to expose the entire network because they believe they were manipulated not just by Connor, but by a group of people working together to defraud them. The psychological chess match I thought had ended was apparently entering a new phase, with players I didn't even know existed. Who else is involved? That's what today's meeting is supposed to reveal. Connor claims he's willing to provide complete information about his co-conspirators in exchange for Pinnacle Properties reducing their civil litigation against him. Roberto paused thoughtfully. But there's something else. Connor specifically requested that you be present for this disclosure. The request surprised me. After everything we had been through, why would Connor want me involved in exposing his allies? Did he say why he wants me there? According to his attorney, Connor believes the other conspirators pose an ongoing threat to Meadowbrook Acres that won't be resolved simply by his departure from the situation. Roberto's tone carried warning. He thinks you need to know who else has been working against your family's interests. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the same conference room where Connor had confessed his fraud just days earlier. But this time, the atmosphere felt different. Less like a family confrontation and more like the unveiling of a criminal conspiracy that extended far beyond sibling rivalry. Connor arrived looking haggard but determined, accompanied not just by his attorney David Morrison, but also by Margaret Chen, and a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Dr. Amanda Torres, a forensic accountant specializing in agricultural fraud investigations. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Connor began, his tone formal and careful. "What I'm about to reveal will probably shock you as much as it shocked me when I discovered the full scope of what's been happening." Margaret Chen leaned forward, her expression professional but intense. "Mr. Hartwell has provided us with information suggesting that his manipulation of your father was part of a larger scheme involving systematic exploitation of elderly farmers throughout Willowbrook County." The scale of what she was describing hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying this wasn't just about our family?" "Not even close," Dr. Torres interjected, opening a laptop computer and projecting a complex chart onto the conference room wall. "Over the past 18 months, we've identified at least 6 family farms in this county that have been targeted by similar manipulation schemes. Meadowbrook Acres was simply the largest and most valuable target." The chart displayed a network of connections between various individuals, properties, and financial transactions that painted a picture of organized agricultural land fraud spanning multiple families and several years. Connor pointed to one of the names on the chart. "I thought I was working with just Pinnacle Properties to acquire Meadowbrook Acres. But it turns out I was being manipulated by people who were running similar schemes against other farming families throughout the region." Roberto studied the chart intently. "Connor, who recruited you into this scheme? How did your involvement begin?" 3 years ago, I received a call from someone claiming to represent an agricultural investment firm interested in purchasing underutilized farmland for development." Connor's voice carried a mixture of shame and anger. The caller knew details about our family's financial situation, Dad's health concerns, and even personal information about Rebecca's career plans that I hadn't shared with anyone. Dr. Torres highlighted specific connections on her chart. The same pattern appears in all 6 cases. Family members with financial difficulties are contacted by individuals with inside information about family dynamics, elderly parents' vulnerabilities, and property values. Margaret Chen added context that made the conspiracy even more disturbing. In every case, the family member who was recruited believed they were working with legitimate development companies. They didn't realize they were part of a coordinated fraud network targeting elderly agricultural property owners. I struggled to process the magnitude of what they were describing. "So Connor was a victim too, in some sense?" "A victim who became a perpetrator," Dr. Torres clarified. "But yes, the people running this scheme specifically target family members who are financially vulnerable and psychologically predisposed to rationalize stealing from their own relatives." Connor nodded reluctantly. "They knew I was struggling. Financially. They knew I resented Rebecca's relationship with Dad and the farm. They fed me justifications for why selling the land was actually the responsible choice for the family's financial future." Roberto leaned forward with the key question. "Who are they? Who's running this network?" Connor looked directly at me as he answered. "The person who recruited me, who provided inside information about our family, and who coordinated with Pinnacle Properties to make the scheme seem legitimate is someone you know well, Rebecca." Someone who had access to Dad's medical records, his financial information, and detailed knowledge about farm operations. My mind raced through possibilities, but nothing prepared me for Connor's revelation. Dr. Patricia Williams, Dad's longtime physician and family friend. The woman who treated him during his final illness, who had access to his medical files, and who knew exactly how to time the manipulation to coincide with his declining health. The betrayal hit harder than anything Connor had done. Dr. Williams had been treating our family for 20 years. She had delivered me when I was born, had guided Dad through various health challenges, and had been present during some of our family's most vulnerable moments. Patricia Williams has been identifying elderly farmers with valuable property, accessing their medical and financial information through her practice, and then recruiting family members to participate in inheritance fraud schemes, Dr. Torres explained. She provides the inside information that makes the manipulation possible. Margaret Chen added the final piece that made the conspiracy's scope clear. Dr. Williams has been working with a network of development companies, attorneys, and financial consultants to systematically target agricultural families across 3 counties. Pinnacle Properties was just one of several companies being fed fraudulent deals. Connor's voice grew quieter as he continued. When I realized how completely I had been manipulated, not just into betraying our family, but into being a pawn in someone else's criminal enterprise, I knew I had to expose the entire network. Roberto was taking detailed notes, recognizing the legal implications of what Connor was revealing. Are you prepared to provide testimony and evidence against Dr. Williams and her associates? I'll provide everything, Connor confirmed. Financial records, recorded conversations, email communications, all of it. Dr. Williams and her network destroyed our family and at least 5 others. They need to face consequences for what they've done. As the meeting progressed through the afternoon, the full scope of the agricultural fraud network became clear. Dr. Williams had been systematically exploiting her position as a trusted medical provider to identify vulnerable elderly farmers, then coordinating with corrupted family members and fraudulent development companies to steal generational wealth through sophisticated manipulation schemes. But perhaps most importantly, Connor's cooperation with the investigation meant that other families who had been victimized might finally get justice, and future families would be protected from similar exploitation. The psychological chess match had evolved into something far more significant than a family inheritance dispute. We were now part of exposing a criminal conspiracy that threatened the agricultural heritage of our entire region. And for the first time since this ordeal began, Connor and I were working toward the same goal, protecting farming families from the predators who would destroy their legacies for profit. The revelation about Dr. Williams's involvement transformed our situation from a resolved family dispute into an active criminal investigation that demanded immediate and strategic action. Within hours of Connor's disclosure, Roberto had contacted the Willowbrook County District Attorney's Office, the State Medical Board, and the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. The agricultural fraud network was too extensive and sophisticated for local law enforcement to handle alone. By Wednesday morning, my hospital room had essentially become an unofficial command center for coordinating the investigation. Federal agents, county prosecutors, and agricultural crime specialists rotated through meetings that felt surreal given my continued physical limitations. I was still dependent on a wheelchair and pain medication, yet somehow had become a key witness in a multi-county criminal conspiracy case. Special Agent Maria Santos, no relation to my physical therapist Maria, arrived Wednesday afternoon with a team of forensic accountants and digital evidence specialists. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and the kind of focused intensity that suggested extensive experience with complex financial crimes. Ms. Hartwell, your cooperation in this investigation could help us dismantle a criminal network that has stolen millions of dollars from farming families across the region, Agent Santos explained, settling into the bedside chair that had hosted so many crucial conversations over recent weeks. But I need you to understand the risks involved. The warning immediately captured my attention. What kind of risks? Dr. Williams and her associates have significant resources and sophisticated methods. When they realize their network has been exposed, they may attempt to intimidate witnesses, destroy evidence, or accelerate their targeting of remaining vulnerable families. Agent Santos consulted her notes. Your brother's cooperation has already triggered some concerning responses. Roberto, who had become my unofficial legal coordinator for all matters related to the expanding investigation, leaned forward with obvious concern. What kind of responses? Connor received 3 phone calls yesterday from unknown numbers. The callers knew details about his current location, his financial situation with Pinnacle Properties, and his agreement with Rebecca regarding Meadowbrook Acres. Agent Santos's expression grew more serious. Someone is monitoring the situation very closely and attempting to pressure him into withdrawing his cooperation. The implication sent a chill through me. These weren't desperate individuals acting impulsively. They were organized criminals with resources for surveillance and intimidation. Are Connor and I in physical danger? We don't believe so, but we're taking precautions. Connor has been moved to a secure location until we can arrest the primary conspirators, and we're arranging for enhanced security at the hospital and at Meadowbrook Acres. Agent Santos paused thoughtfully. The good news is that their desperation suggests Connor's information is accurate and valuable. The investigation was moving with impressive speed. Dr. Williams had been suspended from her medical practice pending the investigation, her access to patient records terminated, and her financial accounts frozen while forensic accountants traced. Money flows through the criminal network. But the scope of evidence collection was staggering. We've identified financial transactions totaling over $12 million that appear connected to fraudulent agricultural property transfers, Agent Santos reported. Dr. Williams's network has been operating for at least 5 years, possibly longer. The sophistication of their operations suggests professional criminal expertise beyond simple local fraud. Roberto had been coordinating with other attorneys representing families who had been victimized by similar schemes. The pattern is consistent across all cases: elderly farmers manipulated during health crises, family members recruited through financial pressure, and fraudulent development deals that ultimately benefited the criminal network, rather than legitimate property development. As disturbing as the investigation's revelations were, I found myself feeling energized by the possibility that our painful experience might prevent similar victimization of other farming families. Dad's strategic planning hadn't just protected Meadowbrook Acres. It had exposed a criminal conspiracy that threatened the agricultural heritage of our entire region. Agent Santos, what do you need from me to ensure this investigation succeeds? I asked, recognizing that my role had evolved beyond protecting my own inheritance to helping dismantle a systematic threat to agricultural families. We need you to continue operating normally while we gather evidence. The criminals don't yet know that Connor has exposed the entire network, so they may attempt to contact you directly or through intermediaries. Agent Santos's request felt both dangerous and necessary. Any communication attempts could provide crucial evidence about their operations and identify additional conspirators we haven't discovered yet. The proposal essentially made me bait in a trap designed to catch sophisticated criminals, but the potential to protect other families made the risk feel worthwhile. What kind of contact should I expect? Possibly attempts to intimidate you into dropping legal actions against Connor, offers to buy Meadowbrook Acres for amounts that seem too generous, or approaches from individuals claiming to represent legitimate development companies. Agent Santos consulted her tablet. Dr. Williams's network relies on appearing legitimate and trustworthy, so initial contact will probably seem professional and reasonable. Roberto expressed the concern I was feeling. If Rebecca participates in this kind of evidence gathering, while she's still hospitalized and physically vulnerable, what protection can you provide? Round-the-clock federal protection, secure communication systems, and immediate response capability if any threats materialize. Agent Santos's assurance was professional, but not entirely comforting. Ms. Hartwell's safety is our absolute priority, but her cooperation could prevent dozens of other families from losing their agricultural legacies to these criminals. The decision felt inevitable. Dad had taught me that protecting something valuable sometimes required accepting reasonable risks, and the opportunity to safeguard other farming families aligned perfectly with his values of community responsibility and agricultural preservation. I'll cooperate fully, I decided. What do I need to know about evidence-gathering protocols? Agent Santos spent the next hour briefing me on recording procedures, communication security, and recognition techniques for identifying potential criminal approaches. The level of sophistication required suggested that Dr. Williams's network was indeed professional-grade criminal enterprise rather than opportunistic local fraud. Thursday brought the first test of our evidence-gathering strategy. A woman identifying herself as Linda Peterson called the hospital requesting to speak with me about opportunities to resolve the recent family difficulties regarding Meadowbrook Acres in a way that benefits everyone involved. Following Agent Santos's instructions, I agreed to take the call while federal agents monitored and recorded the conversation from an adjacent room. Ms. Hartwell, I represent agricultural development consultants who specialize in helping families navigate complex inheritance situations, Linda Peterson began, her tone professional and sympathetic. We understand you've had some difficulties with family members regarding property management, and we'd like to offer assistance in resolving these issues. The approach was exactly what Agent Santos had predicted, seemingly legitimate, focused on helping rather than pressuring, and offering solutions to problems they claimed to understand. What kind of assistance do you provide? I asked, following the script we had rehearsed. We help farming families maximize the value of their agricultural properties while respecting their emotional attachments to the land. Sometimes this involves partial development that preserves agricultural use while generating significant income for property owners. Her explanation sounded reasonable and attractive. We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss options that might interest you. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Linda Peterson demonstrating detailed knowledge about Meadowbrook Acres, my family situation, and even specifics about the Agricultural Preservation Trust that should have been confidential information. After ending the call, Agent Santos reviewed the recording with obvious satisfaction. Perfect. She revealed knowledge about your trust documentation that proves insider access to legal proceedings. And the phone number she called, from traces to a burner phone registered under a false identity, the evidence was accumulating quickly, but I realized that each successful recording brought us closer to a confrontation with criminals who had demonstrated willingness to use intimidation and surveillance against their targets. The psychological chess match was entering its most dangerous phase, where victory would require not just intelligence and strategy, but courage in the face of genuine criminal threat. But for the first time since this ordeal began, Connor and I were working together toward a goal that transcended our family conflicts, protecting agricultural families from predators who would destroy generational legacies for profit. The stakes had never been higher, but neither had the potential for meaningful justice. The criminal network's desperation became evident faster than anyone had anticipated. By Friday morning, Linda Peterson had called twice more, each conversation revealing increasing pressure to schedule an immediate meeting despite my continued hospitalization. Agent Santos interpreted this urgency as a sign that Dr. Williams and her associates were aware their network was compromised and were attempting to salvage what they could before federal arrests began. We're accelerating the timeline, Agent Santos informed me during our morning briefing. Based on intelligence gathered from other sources, we believe Dr. Williams is planning to flee the country within the next 72 hours. If we're going to arrest the primary conspirators and seize their assets, we need to act this weekend. The prospect of imminent arrests brought both relief and anxiety. The criminal network that had terrorized farming families for years would finally face justice. But the accelerated timeline meant increased risks for everyone involved in the investigation. What does this mean for my role in evidence gathering? I asked, recognizing that my position as bait in the federal trap was about to become much more active. Linda Peterson has proposed meeting with you tomorrow afternoon at the hospital, claiming she needs to assess your situation personally before making development proposals. Agent Santos consulted her tactical notes. We want you to agree to this meeting. Federal agents will be positioned throughout the hospital, and the meeting will provide us with an opportunity to arrest Peterson while gathering final evidence about the network's operations. Roberto looked uncomfortable with the plan's risks. Is it safe to have criminal suspects in Rebecca's hospital room? She's still recovering from serious injuries and has limited mobility if something goes wrong. We'll have agents positioned within 30 seconds of her room, and Rebecca will be wearing a panic button that triggers immediate response. Agent Santos's assurance was professional but highlighted the real dangers involved. The meeting will be completely controlled, but we need Peterson to believe she's conducting normal business. The plan required me to appear vulnerable and cooperative while actually serving as the centerpiece of a federal arrest operation. The irony wasn't lost on me. After weeks of feeling powerless in a hospital bed, I was finally positioned to take decisive action that would protect countless farming families. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp November weather that would normally have found me preparing Meadowbrook Acres for winter. Instead, I was preparing to confront sophisticated criminals in a hospital room surrounded by hidden federal agents and recording equipment. Linda Peterson arrived precisely at 2 p.m., appearing exactly as I had expected: professional, confident, and carrying herself with the kind of authority that would put elderly farmers at ease. She was an attractive woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with the warm demeanor of someone skilled at gaining trust quickly. Rebecca, thank you so much for agreeing to meet despite your recovery situation, she began, settling into the bedside chair with practiced comfort. I can only imagine how stressful these family inheritance issues have been, especially while dealing with serious injuries. Her sympathy felt genuine, which made her criminal intentions even more disturbing. This was exactly the kind of manipulative approach that had convinced Connor and other family members to betray their own relatives. It has been overwhelming, I admitted, following the script Agent Santos and I had rehearsed. I'm still trying to understand all the legal complexities and figure out what's best for the farm. Peterson leaned forward with apparent concern. That's exactly why our services can be valuable. Family inheritance disputes often create emotional decisions that don't serve anyone's long-term interests. We help families find objective solutions that maximize benefits for everyone involved. As our conversation progressed, Peterson demonstrated the same detailed knowledge about my family situation that had characterized her phone calls. She knew about Connor's financial difficulties, Dad's health history, and specifics about Meadowbrook Acres agricultural operations that should have been confidential. Rebecca, I'll be direct with you, Peterson said after 20 minutes of building rapport. Your brother Connor was working with our development partners before his recent legal difficulties. The opportunities he was exploring remain available, regardless of his current situation. The revelation that she knew about Connor's legal difficulties was particularly telling, since his cooperation with federal investigators hadn't been made public. Her knowledge proved active monitoring of the investigation and confirmed her connection to the criminal network. What kind of opportunities? I asked, maintaining the appearance of naive interest while knowing that federal agents were recording every word. Peterson withdrew a tablet computer and began displaying development proposals that were surprisingly sophisticated and detailed. Agricultural land can be developed in phases that preserve farming operations while generating substantial revenue from commercial and residential projects. Your property could support development worth $15 to $20 million while maintaining its agricultural designation. The proposals were seductive, offering financial benefits that would tempt anyone facing the challenges of modern farming. But embedded within the attractive presentations were contract terms that would have given Peterson's associates control over property decisions and future development rights. "These numbers seem almost too good to be true," I observed, testing how she would respond to skepticism. "I understand your caution. Many farming families have been taken advantage of by unscrupulous developers who promise unrealistic returns." Peterson's response was perfectly calibrated to address my concerns while positioning her offer as uniquely legitimate. "That's why we only work with families through trusted intermediaries who can verify our track record and financial capacity." The mention of trusted intermediaries was exactly what Agent Santos had hoped to capture: acknowledgement of the network of professionals who facilitated the fraud schemes. "What kind of intermediaries?" I pressed, recognizing this as crucial intelligence. "Medical professionals, attorneys, financial advisors, people who work closely with farming families and understand their needs and vulnerabilities." Peterson's explanation confirmed the systematic nature of the criminal network. "These professionals help us identify families who would benefit from our services and provide guidance throughout the development process." As Peterson continued describing her network's services, federal agents were undoubtedly documenting evidence that would support conspiracy charges against multiple professionals across several counties. But the meeting took an unexpected turn when Peterson's phone buzzed with an apparently urgent message. After reading it, her demeanor changed subtly but noticeably, the warm professionalism replaced by something more calculating and urgent. "Rebecca, I need to be honest with you about something," Peterson said, her tone becoming more direct. "There are people who don't want your family to benefit from these development opportunities. People who have been spreading false information about our services and creating legal complications for families who try to work with us." The shift felt like a threat disguised as a warning, and I found myself genuinely nervous despite knowing that federal agents were nearby. "What kind of people?" I asked, though I suspected she was referring to law enforcement and prosecutors. "Government, bureaucrats who oppose agricultural development, attorneys who profit from family conflicts, even some law enforcement officials who don't understand the legitimate business we provide." Peterson's explanation was clearly designed to discredit any negative information I might have heard about her network. "These people want to keep farming families trapped in poverty rather than helping them realize the full value of their property." The paranoid tone of her conspiracy theories revealed desperation that confirmed Agent Santos's assessment about the network's awareness of the investigation. Peterson leaned closer to my bed, lowering her voice in a way that felt genuinely threatening. "Rebecca, if certain people have approached you with questions about your family's business or our services, it would be best for everyone if you decline to cooperate with them. Sometimes, government interference in private family matters creates more problems than it solves." The thinly veiled intimidation was exactly what federal agents needed to document, but experiencing it personally was more frightening than I had anticipated. "Are you saying I shouldn't talk to law enforcement if they contact me?" I asked, wanting to get her threat on record as clearly as possible. "I'm saying that families who cooperate with our services and avoid unnecessary government entanglements tend to have much better outcomes." Peterson's smile was cold and calculated. "We take care of people who take care of us, if you understand my meaning." At that moment, the hospital room door opened and Agent Santos entered with two other federal agents, their badges clearly visible and their expressions professionally serious. "Linda Peterson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and intimidation of federal witnesses," Agent Santos announced, reading Miranda rights while Peterson's expression transformed from confident manipulation to shocked recognition that her criminal network had been completely exposed. As federal agents escorted Peterson from my hospital room in handcuffs, I realized that the psychological chess match that had begun with Connor's betrayal was finally reaching its conclusion. The criminals who had systematically preyed on farming families for years were about to face justice, and other families would be protected from similar exploitation. But more importantly, Dad's strategic planning had accomplished something beyond. Protecting Meadowbrook Acres, it had exposed and dismantled a criminal conspiracy that threatened the agricultural heritage of our entire region. The network's reign of terror was ending, and justice was finally within reach. The arrests happened with stunning efficiency across 3 counties simultaneously. Within 6 hours of Linda Peterson's capture at the hospital, federal agents had taken Dr. Patricia Williams into custody at her medical practice, along with 2 attorneys from different law firms, a financial advisor, and 3 development company executives. The coordinated operation dismantled the entire criminal network in a single afternoon. Agent Santos returned to my hospital room Sunday evening with updates that revealed the staggering scope of what they had uncovered. Peterson's laptop contained detailed records of 43 families that had been targeted over the past 5 years, she reported, settling into the chair that had become the unofficial briefing position for this ongoing investigation. 12. Families lost their agricultural properties completely, while others suffered significant financial damage before the schemes were discovered. The magnitude of the criminal enterprise was overwhelming. 43 farming families manipulated, exploited, and in many cases financially destroyed by professionals they had trusted completely. How much money are we talking about? Conservative. Estimates suggest the network stole or attempted to steal over $30 million in agricultural property and assets. Agent Santos consulted her tablet. But the psychological and community damage extends far beyond financial calculations. These criminals destroyed generational legacies and family relationships that can never be fully restored. Roberto, who had coordinated legal support throughout the investigation, leaned forward with a question that had been troubling me as well. What happens to the families who lost their farms before this network was exposed? Can they recover their properties? That's complicated. Some properties can be recovered through asset forfeiture proceedings if we can prove they were acquired through fraud. Others may require civil litigation that could take years to resolve. Agent Santos's expression conveyed the frustration of knowing that justice for past victims would be incomplete. But your family's cooperation has prevented dozens of additional families from becoming victims, and the criminal prosecutions will ensure these particular criminals never harm farming families again. The knowledge that our painful experience had protected other families provided meaningful comfort, though it couldn't completely offset the tragedy of what previous victims had endured. Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor who would transform my understanding of Dad's strategic planning even further. Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, the chief medical examiner for Willowbrook County, arrived with information that Agent Santos had requested she share personally. Ms. Hartwell, during the investigation into Dr. Williams' criminal activities, we reviewed medical records for all elderly patients who died while being treated by her practice, Dr. Martinez explained, her manner both professional and deeply compassionate. Your father's medical records revealed some concerning patterns that I believe you should know about. Roberto immediately became alert to potential legal implications. What kind of patterns? Dr. Williams prescribed medications for your father that were unnecessary and potentially harmful, particularly drugs that can cause confusion, memory problems, and increased susceptibility to manipulation. Dr. Martinez consulted her medical notes. The timing of these prescriptions correlates directly with Connor's attempts to manipulate your father's estate planning. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Dr. Williams hadn't just exploited her access to Dad's medical information, she had actively compromised his mental capacity to make him more vulnerable to Connor's deception. Are you saying Dr. Williams drugged my father to make him easier to manipulate? I asked, struggling to process the depths of her betrayal. The evidence strongly suggests that possibility. Your father was experiencing artificially induced cognitive impairment during the period when Connor convinced him to change his will. Dr. Martinez's confirmation was devastating. but also provided crucial context for understanding Dad's actions during his final months. Agent Santos added legal context that made the medical evidence even more significant. This information supports additional charges against Dr. Williams for endangering elderly patients and facilitating elder abuse through medical manipulation. It also provides grounds for invalidating any legal documents your father signed while under the influence of unnecessary medications. The medical evidence explained something that had been troubling me since discovering Dad's strategic planning. How had he maintained the clarity to create such sophisticated countermeasures while apparently being deceived by Connor's manipulation? The answer was that he hadn't been deceived at all. He had recognized the manipulation and planned accordingly, even while dealing with artificially induced cognitive impairment. Dr. Martinez, was my father aware that he was being drugged? I asked, hoping to understand how much Dad had suffered during his final months. Based on notes he made in his personal medical journal, which we discovered during the investigation, your father suspected that his medications were affecting his thinking more than they should have. Dr. Martinez's voice carried both admiration and sadness. He documented his concerns and even researched the side effects of drugs Dr. Williams was prescribing. Your father was fighting back against the manipulation even while being chemically compromised. This revelation recontextualized Dad's entire strategic approach. He hadn't just anticipated Connor's betrayal. He had recognized a sophisticated, criminal conspiracy involving his trusted physician and had created countermeasures while being actively drugged to impair his judgment. Roberto was taking detailed notes, recognizing the legal implications of the medical evidence. This information could be crucial for other families who lost properties while their elderly relatives were patients of Dr. Williams. If she was systematically drugging elderly farmers to make them more vulnerable to manipulation, many previous property transfers could be legally challenged. Agent Santos confirmed that the medical evidence was already being integrated into the broader criminal case. Dr. Williams faces federal charges for conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse, and now medical malpractice involving criminal intent. She's looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison if convicted on all counts. As Monday afternoon progressed into evening, Connor arrived for what Agent Santos described as his final debriefing session before the criminal trials began. He looked healthier than he had during our previous meetings, as if confessing his role in the conspiracy and cooperating with federal investigators had lifted a psychological burden he had been carrying for years. "Rebecca, I wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to make this right," Connor said, his tone carrying genuine gratitude mixed with profound remorse. "I know that cooperating with the investigation doesn't undo what I did to our family, but at least other families won't suffer because of my mistakes." Agent Santos confirmed that Connor's cooperation had been crucial to the investigation's success. Without his detailed information about the network's operations and his willingness to testify against the other conspirators, we couldn't have built cases strong enough to ensure convictions. Connor's rehabilitation from criminal accomplice to cooperating witness represented a form of redemption that I hadn't expected when this ordeal began. His betrayal had been devastating, but his ultimate choice to expose the entire criminal network had protected dozens of other farming families from similar victimization. "What happens now?" I asked, recognizing that the investigation phase was ending and the legal accountability phase was beginning. "Criminal trials for all 7 defendants will begin in federal court next month," Agent Santos replied. "Connor will testify for the prosecution, providing detailed testimony about how the network recruited him and operated their schemes. The evidence is overwhelming, so we expect plea agreements from most defendants rather than lengthy trials." Roberto added information about civil proceedings that would follow the criminal cases. Families who lost properties to this network will have strong grounds for civil lawsuits seeking damages and property recovery. The criminal convictions will make civil cases much easier to prove. As Connor prepared to leave for his continued cooperation with prosecutors, he paused at my bedside with a final observation. "Rebecca, I've been thinking about what Dad would say about all this. I think he'd be proud that his planning not only protected Meadowbrook Acres, but also exposed criminals who were threatening other farming families. The assessment felt accurate. Dad's strategic thinking had accomplished something far beyond protecting our individual inheritance. It had served the broader agricultural community by exposing and dismantling a systematic threat to family farming operations. Justice was finally being served, not just for our family's suffering, but for all the farming families who had been victimized by this criminal network. Dad's legacy extended far beyond Meadowbrook Acres to encompass protection and advocacy for agricultural families throughout the region. The psychological chess match was ending with victory not just for our family, but for the entire farming community that Dad had valued and served throughout his life. 6 months later, I stood on the front porch of Meadowbrook Acres without assistance for the first time since the tractor accident that had nearly claimed my life, and inadvertently set in motion the events that would transform not just my family, but the entire agricultural community of Willowbrook County. The external fixator was gone, the wheelchair retired, and while I still carried a slight limp that would probably never fully disappear, I was whole, healed, and ready to embrace the future Dad had so carefully protected for me. The morning sun illuminated fields that were already showing the green shoots of spring planting, managed expertly by Tom Rodriguez during the months of my recovery and the subsequent criminal investigations. The farm had not just survived the crisis, it had thrived under the Agricultural Preservation Trust that Dad had so strategically implemented. Crop yields from the previous fall had exceeded projections, and 3 new sustainable farming contracts had been secured with companies specifically seeking agricultural partners committed to long-term land stewardship. But the transformation extended far beyond Meadowbrook Acres' operational success. The farmhouse had been converted into the headquarters of the Samuel Hartwell Agricultural Protection Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided education, legal resources, and advocacy services for farming families facing exploitation or manipulation. The Foundation's mission statement, carved into a beautiful piece of reclaimed barnwood above the front door, read simply, "Protecting agricultural legacies through wisdom, strategy, and community." Elena Vasquez had left her position at Riverside National Bank to serve as the Foundation's executive director, bringing her financial expertise and passion for community service to the mission of protecting farming families from predatory schemes. The bank itself had partnered with the foundation to offer specialized estate protection services that helped elderly farmers secure their legacies against manipulation while ensuring smooth succession planning for the next generation. "Rebecca, the reporters from Agricultural Weekly are here for the interview," Elena called from the front door, her professional demeanor now focused on amplifying the foundation's protective mission rather than simply helping individual banking customers. The interview was part of a national agricultural publications feature story about criminal schemes targeting farming families and the community responses that had emerged to combat them. Our foundation's work in Willowbrook County had attracted attention from agricultural advocates across the country, leading to invitations to speak at farming conferences, collaborate with law enforcement agencies, and provide consultation services for other communities facing similar threats. The reporters, Sarah Kim and Michael Torres, were experienced agricultural journalists who understood both the economic and emotional significance of family farming operations. They had spent the morning touring Meadowbrook Acres, interviewing Tom Rodriguez about sustainable farming practices, and documenting the foundation's educational programs that taught young farmers about protecting their operations from financial exploitation. "Ms. Hartwell, how has your family's experience shaped the Foundation's approach to protecting agricultural legacies?" Sarah Kim asked, settling into the wicker chairs on the front porch that had hosted so many crucial conversations during my recovery. "My father taught me that the best defense is often a good offense," I replied, gesturing toward the fields that stretched to the horizon. "Instead of just protecting individual farms after problems arise, we focus on education, early intervention, and community networks that make exploitation much more difficult for criminals to accomplish. The Foundation's educational programs were indeed comprehensive. Monthly workshops taught farming families about recognizing manipulation tactics, protecting legal documents, and establishing communication protocols that prevented isolation during vulnerable periods. Legal clinics provided affordable access to estate planning attorneys who specialized in agricultural protection strategies. And perhaps most importantly, support networks connected farming families with peers who could provide guidance and assistance. During difficult transitions, Michael Torres consulted his notes. The criminal prosecutions resulting from your family's case led to convictions for 7 individuals and asset recoveries totaling $12 million. How has this affected other families who were victimized by the same network? 8 families have recovered their agricultural properties through asset forfeiture proceedings, I confirmed, still amazed by the legal system's ability to provide meaningful justice when properly supported with evidence and advocacy. 15 other families received financial settlements that helped them rebuild their operations or transition to new agricultural ventures. But beyond the monetary recoveries, the prosecutions sent a clear message that our community won't tolerate exploitation of elderly farmers. The psychological impact of the criminal convictions had been as important as the financial recoveries. Dr. Patricia Williams had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, effectively ending her ability to harm farming families ever again. The attorneys, financial advisors, and development company executives who had participated in the network received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years, along with substantial financial penalties and professional sanctions that would prevent them from returning to positions where they could exploit agricultural families. Elena approached our conversation area, carrying a folder that contained the Foundation's latest impact report. We're now working with agricultural protection advocates in 6 states, she added to the interview. The strategies developed here in Willowbrook County are being adapted to address similar threats in farming communities across the Midwest and South. The Foundation's influence was indeed expanding beyond our local community. Federal law enforcement agencies were using our educational materials to train agents who investigated agricultural crime. State bar associations were implementing continuing education requirements for attorneys who worked with elderly farmers. And agricultural colleges were incorporating exploitation recognition and prevention into their farm management curricula. What role does your brother Connor play in the Foundation's work? Michael Torres asked, addressing the question I had been expecting and dreading in equal measure. Connor serves on our advisory board and provides financial management expertise for the Foundation's operations, I replied carefully. His personal experience with being manipulated into participating in criminal schemes provides valuable insight into how vulnerable family members can be recruited by sophisticated criminals. Connor's rehabilitation had been genuine and sustained. After completing his community service requirements and providing testimony that helped convict the criminal network, he had requested permission to contribute to the Foundation's mission. His banking expertise was valuable for managing the Foundation's endowment funds, and his first-hand knowledge of manipulation tactics helped us develop educational materials that resonated with potentially vulnerable family members. Our personal relationship remained complicated and would probably never fully recover the easy closeness we had shared during childhood. But we had found a way to work together toward protecting other families from the kind of destruction our own family had experienced. Connor's presence at Foundation board meetings served as a constant reminder that people could choose redemption over continued selfishness, even after making terrible mistakes. The Foundation is also working with agricultural colleges to establish scholarship programs for students studying sustainable farming practices, Elena added, highlighting another dimension of our expanding mission. We believe that supporting the next generation of farmers is crucial for preserving agricultural legacies and preventing the abandonment of farming operations that makes elderly property owners vulnerable to exploitation. The scholarship program had become one of my favorite aspects of the Foundation's work. Each year, we provided full tuition support for 12 students who demonstrated both academic excellence and commitment to family farming operations. The recipients were required to complete internships at farms participating in our protection network, creating relationships that benefited both young farmers and experienced agricultural families. As the interview progressed through the afternoon, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with Connor's cold announcement of my disinheritance and culminated in a community-wide movement to protect agricultural families from criminal exploitation. Dad's strategic planning had accomplished something far beyond his original intention to protect Meadowbrook Acres. It had created a legacy of advocacy and protection that would benefit farming families for generations. Ms. Hartwell, what would your father think about the foundation that has grown from his estate planning strategy? Sarah Kim asked as our conversation neared its conclusion. I considered the question carefully, remembering Dad's letters about patience, strategy, and the importance of thinking beyond immediate circumstances. I think he would be amazed by the scope of what has developed, but not surprised by the underlying principle, I replied. He always believed that protecting something valuable required thinking strategically and working with community allies. The foundation simply applies that philosophy on a much larger scale than he originally envisioned. As the reporters departed with their story about agricultural protection advocacy, I remained on the front porch, watching the sunset over fields that represented 4 generations of Hartwell farming dedication. The tractor accident that had nearly killed me had ultimately led to exposing and dismantling a criminal conspiracy that threatened the agricultural heritage of our entire region. Dad's strategic planning had protected not just my inheritance, but the legacies of dozens of other farming families. The psychological chess match that had begun with family betrayal had evolved into something far more meaningful, a community-wide commitment to protecting agricultural families from those who would exploit their vulnerabilities for profit. Dad's final lesson about strategy, patience, and the power of thinking, several moves ahead, had created a legacy that extended far beyond Meadowbrook Acres to encompass the protection and preservation of family farming throughout the region. The inheritance Dad had truly left me wasn't just Meadowbrook Acres. It was the wisdom to use challenges as opportunities for growth, service, and lasting positive change in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.